Have you ever wondered why some relationships, despite their promise, leave you feeling drained and confused? Why what once felt like love slowly turns into a maze of guilt, silence, and second-guessing yourself? It doesn't start with shouting. It doesn't begin with bruises or betrayal. It often begins with a warm smile, a flattering phrase, the illusion of being seen. You feel chosen, special, understood. And then slowly, subtly, the ground beneath you shifts. Your boundaries begin to blur. Your voice dims, not because you're silenced, but because you begin to doubt if it's even worth speaking. This isn't love, it's control. And control that hides beneath the mask of affection is the most dangerous kind. To understand this kind of control, imagine the archetype of the sovereign queen. She is intuitive, grounded, sovereign over her own energy. But when lured by false devotion, her power can be siphoned by those who fear her light, not with chains but with stories, with praise that becomes pressure, with guilt that dresses up as concern. This is how it begins. You might hear, "I just worry about you." Or, "You're so sensitive, I didn't mean it like that." And then, if you really loved me, you'd understand where I'm coming from. What's happening beneath the surface is not connection. It's erosion. Your emotional reality is slowly being replaced by theirs. Carl Jung called this projection. When someone casts their unconscious fears or desires onto another, demanding that person carry what they themselves refuse to face. In the beginning, their charm cloaks their wound. You don't see the fear that drives their need to dominate. You don't yet feel the shadow in them that cannot tolerate your independence. But over time, you sense it. A tightening, a dissonance, a cost, and still you stay. Because the manipulation isn't always violent, it's often tender. That's the trick. Emotional control doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers sweetly. One day, you find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, just to restore peace. You start shrinking parts of yourself to keep the relationship intact. You question your memory, your emotions, your truth. This is gaslighting, the psychological warfare that replaces your inner compass with theirs. To the sovereign queen, gaslighting is treason, not just against the crown, but against the sacred temple of the self. Because when a woman stops trusting herself, she becomes pliable, easily shaped, easily ruled. But here's the truth. Emotional control only thrives when a woman doubts her own perception. The most dangerous manipulations are not the ones we see, but the ones we internalize. Now breathe. Have you ever felt that? That flicker of awareness, that moment where something inside you whispered, "This doesn't feel right." That is your soul trying to speak. It's the echo of your unconscious. The part of you Jung believed holds the keys to truth, authenticity, and wholeness. This is where the work begins. Not in fighting them, but in reclaiming you. You are not here to be anyone's emotional regulator. You are not a container for someone else's suppressed rage or fear. You were not born to be explained away. You were born to embody truth. To protect yourself, you must become fluent in discernment. Discernment is not judgment. It is quiet, clear seeing. It's noticing when words don't match energy, when affection carries obligation, when connection feels more like surveillance than support. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Look at the cycles, the highs and lows, the guilt followed by affection, the distance followed by neediness. These are not random. They are strategies often unconscious to keep you off balance. But you are learning to stand steady. Stoic philosophy teaches, focus only on what you can control. And in a relationship where love becomes leverage, Your power is this. You can choose what energy enters your space. You can choose which voice becomes the loudest in your mind. You can choose, at any moment, to walk away from a bond that demands your silence in exchange for affection. But first, you must stop lying to yourself. Stop calling it complicated when it's actually toxic. Stop calling it passionate when it's actually manipulative. Stop calling it misunderstood when it's clearly violating your peace. The path to emotional freedom is not paved with justification. It's paved with radical clarity. Jung taught that the unconscious will rule your life until you make it conscious. That includes the roles you play in love. Are you the rescuer, always trying to heal them? The caretaker, afraid to be alone? The pleaser, hoping that sacrifice will finally make you feel loved? These roles are not love, they are coping. They are echoes of old wounds, attachment styles shaped by what your nervous system once had to survive. But you are no longer that girl. You are becoming the queen. And a queen does not beg to be cherished. She do. Does not tolerate control disguised as care. She listens to the quiet voice within, even when it contradicts the loud voice of the other. She remembers who she is, even when others try to rewrite her story. So ask yourself now, where have you been silencing your knowing? What have you been calling love? That's actually fear in disguise. Your body already knows. Your heart already knows. And the moment you decide to trust that, truly trust it, the spell begins to break. Control, once seen, cannot be unseen. Once named, it begins to unravel. But the most dangerous thing about emotional manipulation is how often it hides in plain sight. It doesn't always come wrapped in cruelty. Sometimes it sounds like concern, like loyalty, like love. A man might say, "I just want what's best for you." And suddenly, your choices are on trial. Or you've changed, as if your growth is a betrayal. Or you used to need me, as if your healing is a threat. This is not intimacy, it's ownership. And the sovereign queen does not exist to be owned. She exists to rule not over others but over herself, her energy, her time, her inner world. Yet even a queen can be deceived when she is hungry for love. This hunger, this ache for connection is not weakness. It is the mark of being human. But unhealed, it becomes a doorway through which shadow enters, the shadow of another, and the shadow within. Jung taught that what we reject in ourselves does not disappear, it returns. It returns in the people we attract, in the relationships we repeat, until we finally face it. So let's go deeper. Why do we stay in relationships that diminish us? Because the pain is familiar. For many women, the roots of self-erasure go back to childhood. Maybe love came with conditions. Maybe silence was safer than truth. Maybe emotions were too big for the room, and so you learned to dim. In that silence, a seed was planted, the seed of codependency, the belief that your worth is tied to someone else's comfort, that to be loved you must be pleasing, adaptable, small. So when you meet someone who mirrors that old dynamic, not consciously, but energetically, it feels right. Not good, but right, familiar. And the trauma bond begins. You feel drawn to them, bound to them, and even as they chip away at your sense of self, you defend them. You protect the connection, even at the cost of your inner peace. Why? Because deep down, part of you believes that if you can just love them enough, they'll change. That if you sacrifice enough, they'll finally see your worth. But love is not earned through pain. It does not require you to suffer in silence. It requires you to see clearly. And clarity starts with boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are the architecture of self-respect. They say, this is who I am. This is what I will and will not allow. This is how I protect my peace. But for many women, boundaries feel like danger. Why? Because setting them often triggers rejection, anger, withdrawal. And when you've been conditioned to associate love with self-abandonment, saying no feels like loss. But it's not loss, it's liberation. The sovereign queen sets boundaries not to punish, but to preserve. She knows that protecting her energy is not selfish, it's sacred. She understands that when love costs her dignity, her clarity, or her voice, it is too expensive. Still, it's not easy, especially when the manipulator is skilled, charming, convincing. They might twist your words, make you question your memory, redefine reality in ways that slowly disorient you. This is called cognitive dissonance, the mental conflict that happens when your lived experience contradicts the narrative you're being fed. You feel it in your body. Tight chest, knots in your stomach, constant second-guessing. This is your nervous system screaming, something is off. Listen to it. The body remembers, even when the mind is confused. Stoic wisdom tells us, clarity is a kind of freedom, but clarity requires stillness, reflection, the courage to sit with discomfort and ask, what is actually happening here? Strip away the charm, the excuses, the apologies. What remains? Does the relationship nourish you or drain you? Are you growing or shrinking? Are you free or afraid? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Because manipulation cannot survive the light of honest reflection. And here is the truth. You are not here to be controlled. You are not here to be someone's emotional caretaker, savior, or scapegoat. You are here to be whole, to take up space, to speak your truth, to walk away when something desecrates your peace. You are not responsible for how someone reacts to your boundaries. Their discomfort is not your burden. Their anger is not your shame. And if someone only values you when you are convenient, quiet, or compliant, that is not love. That is possession. The sovereign queen chooses presence over performance, truth over comfort, freedom over fantasy. So what does that look like in real life? It looks like pausing before you explain yourself. It looks like trusting your gut when something feels off. It looks like walking away, not with bitterness but with clarity. It looks like refusing to play the role they've written for you and writing your own story instead. Not all control is loud, not all wounds bleed. But silence speaks, and your body holds the truth. So ask yourself, where have you confused love with control? Where have you traded your power for permission? And what would change if you no longer needed to be understood, only free? There is a moment every sovereign queen must face, a threshold. It comes quietly, usually after another sleepless night. After one too many apologies whispered into a silence that never softened. After realizing that love should not feel like negotiation. That moment, that sacred, aching moment, is the awakening. The moment she stops asking, how do I fix this? And begins to ask, why have I accepted this? This is where the shadow meets the light, where truth rises not as a scream but as a knowing, a quiet reclaiming. Jung believed the shadow isn't evil. It's simply unseen, repressed, forgotten. And in relationships, this shadow shows up as the part of you that stays silent, that tolerates pain in the name of loyalty, that confuses being chosen with being cherished. So many women are taught to fear the shadow, to bury their anger, to mask their intuition, to deny the fire that says enough. But anger, when sacred, is not destruction. It's protection. It's the queen standing from her throne and saying, "This energy is no longer welcome in my kingdom." Because true power is not loud, it's clean. It's the clarity that comes when you've witnessed your own betrayal and choose yourself anyway. But let's speak plainly. Control often wears the face of love. It flatters you, then isolates you. It gifts you attention, then questions your independence. It praises your softness, then punishes your strength. And slowly, it rewrites your reality. This is not just behavior. This is psychological conditioning, and its roots run deep. Attachment theory tells us the way we bonded or did bond in early life wires our nervous system. If your love was earned, you'll feel compelled to earn it again. If your needs were shamed, you'll learn to silence them. If your voice was ignored, you'll become fluent in self-abandonment. So when someone mirrors that old pattern, controlling, dismissive, critical, your nervous system might light up with recognition. Not safety, familiarity. And that familiarity can be addictive. Like a labyrinth, it pulls you in. Every moment of validation feels euphoric. Every withdrawal feels devastating. You start chasing the high of being seen, forgetting the cost. This is how emotional manipulation becomes a cycle. Push, pull, praise, punishment. And in the middle, you slowly unraveling. But here's the medicine. You are not broken for wanting love. You are not foolish for staying longer than you should. You are simply hoping the wound would become the cure. But wounds do not heal in the same place they were created. And love, real love, does not require you to fracture yourself to fit. So what breaks the cycle? Not force, not fighting, but recognition. When you see the pattern, you are no longer inside it. When you speak the truth, the spell begins to fade. When you choose silence not as submission, but as sovereignty, you return to yourself. And that's where your power lives. Not in convincing them to change. Not in fixing what was never yours to carry. But in choosing your own peace over their approval. This is individuation, Jung's sacred path to wholeness. It's the process of stepping out of inherited roles, unconscious patterns, and toxic dynamics, and into who you truly are. No longer the pleaser, the chameleon, the good girl, but the queen, whole, unbought, awake. She doesn't beg for loyalty. She doesn't barter with truth. She doesn't shrink for the comfort of others. She listens deeply to her body, her breath, her boundaries. She no longer explains why she leaves, because she knows those who manipulate already understand, and those who love her never needed the explanation. Still, grief comes, not just for the person, but for the illusion. You grieve the version of yourself who stayed too long, who believed too much, who thought love meant saving someone. Let that grief wash through you. It is not weakness. It is a funeral for the fantasy. And after that funeral, space. For clarity. For calm. For the sacred return to self. You begin to realize peace is not something they give. It's what rises when they leave. So now the question is no longer, why did they control me? The question becomes, why did I forget my own power? This shift from blame to reclamation is the beginning of everything. Because once you see your value, truly see it, manipulation loses its grip. You stop mistaking chaos for our passion. You stop calling pain normal. You stop needing someone to choose you because you've already chosen yourself. The sovereign queen does not need to be rescued. She does not chase. She does not perform. She simply remembers. And in that remembering, she becomes unshakable. So ask yourself now, where have you been asking others to validate what your soul already knows? What would change if you stopped negotiating with people who only understand your worth when it serves them? And are you ready, truly ready, to stop playing the role and write the truth? The truth is, not everyone benefits from your awakening. When you rise, when you step out of the role they assigned you, something in them panics. Because control depends on your confusion. If you stop doubting yourself, they lose their leverage. If you stop apologizing for your truth, their tactics lose their power. So the moment you reclaim your voice, they may shift tactics. Suddenly, you're the problem. You're overreacting. You've changed. You think you're better than me now. But beneath those words is fear. Fear of losing access to your energy, your empathy, your emotional labor. Because they never truly loved you. They loved your compliance. This is the final illusion to break. To stop calling dependency devotion. To stop confusing intensity with intimacy. To stop believing that control is a twisted form of care. Real love doesn't demand your silence. It celebrates your voice. It doesn't coil tighter when you grow, it expands with you. Anything else is a contract, unspoken but binding. And once you see it, you have a choice. To stay in the play or exit the stage. But here's what no one tells you. Leaving isn't always loud. It's not always a dramatic goodbye. Sometimes it's quiet. A shift in energy, a refusal to react, a decision made in silence and sealed in your soul. The sovereign queen doesn't need fireworks to walk away. Her absence is its own revolution. Because when a woman stops explaining herself, when she simply exits the dynamic with grace, she sends a message louder than any scream. My peace is no longer up for negotiation. Still, don't expect the world to applaud. In fact, some may call you cold, too guarded, difficult. Let them. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. It's the sound of their manipulation no longer landing. The truth is, most people only respect boundaries they cannot break. So become unbreakable, not by hardening but by deepening. Go into the places within you that still ache, the parts that whisper. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I just need to try harder. These voices are not your truth. They are echoes of old programming, ghosts of a time when love meant survival. You are no longer that woman. You are no longer the little girl who had to earn safety. No longer the teenager who swallowed her needs to keep the peace. No longer the partner who twisted herself into shapes just to be wanted. You are sovereign now, which means you choose. You choose who gets access to you. You choose what energy you absorb. You choose to walk away, not because you're cruel, but because you're finally kind to yourself. The path of emotional intelligence is not about controlling others. It's about mastering your own internal landscape. It's the discipline of saying no when everything in you wants to say yes, just to avoid discomfort. It's the practice of listening to your intuition and honoring it the first time. It's the quiet power of protecting your peace like it's sacred ground, because it is. And you'll notice something. As you embody this truth, not speak it, but live it, your entire life recalibrates. People fall away, but so does chaos. So does confusion. So does that hollow ache that used to gnaw at you in the middle of the night. In its place, stillness. At first, it may feel lonely, like standing in a wide, open field with no noise, no drama, no one trying to pull your strings. But soon, that stillness becomes the song of your soul, the quiet knowing that you are safe, not because someone said so, but because you made it so. You're no longer waiting to be rescued. You've become your own sanctuary. And now, from that sacred ground, you can discern who's worthy of your energy. Not perfect people, but honest ones. People who don't fear your power, who don't try to tame your fire, who meet you in truth, not tactics. This is what the Sovereign Queen knows. Love is not supposed to feel like a battlefield. Your needs are not negotiable. Your truth is not inconvenient. And when someone cannot meet you in emotional integrity, that is not a failure of yours, it is clarity. You did not lose them, you found yourself. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you no longer abandoned yourself to keep someone else comfortable? What becomes possible when your loyalty returns to your own soul? And are you ready, finally, to live as if your peace is the highest priority? There comes a day when you no longer need the apology. Not because the pain didn't matter, not because the betrayal didn't cut deep, but because you've stepped beyond it, outgrown it, alchemized it into wisdom. That's what the Sovereign Queen does. She doesn't wait for closure, she becomes it. When love feels like control, when affection comes wrapped in guilt, when every "I love you" feels like a contract instead of a gift, something inside you begins to hollow. You start waking up tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because you're carrying too many unspoken truths, too many invisible compromises. And one day, the exhaustion becomes clarity. You look around and realize the love you were fighting to protect was mostly illusion. You weren't held, you were handled. You weren't seen, you were studied. You weren't loved, you were leveraged. It hurts and it heals, because the same realization that shatters your fantasy sets you free. You don't need to justify your boundaries anymore. You don't need to decode their mixed signals. You don't need to chase closure from someone who benefits from your confusion. Because you're starting to remember who you were before the gaslighting, before the guilt, before the emotional gymnastics. And in that remembering, you return to yourself. Jung taught that individuation, the becoming of the true self, requires the integration of all you've denied. That includes your anger, your grief, your boundaries, your wild, untamed voice. All the parts you were told were too much. All the parts you muted to keep the peace. All the parts that threatened their control. Those are the parts that will save you. They are not liabilities, they are leaders. They rise not to destroy, but to liberate. Because once a woman reclaims the parts of herself that were once exiled, her intuition, her clarity, her standards, she becomes untouchable in all the right ways. No longer shaped by someone else's emotional climate. No longer defined by someone else's validation. No longer available for dynamics that dishonor her soul. This is what emotional intelligence becomes in practice. Not intellectualizing red flags, but walking away from them. Not hoping someone will change, but recognizing you were never their rehabilitation center. Not trying to explain your pain to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Just breathing deeper, standing taller, loving wiser. Choosing relationships that feel like sunlight, not smoke. And don't be surprised if your absence enrages them. The manipulator doesn't miss you. They miss access to your energy, your empathy, your willingness to question yourself instead of them. But that version of you is gone. She didn't disappear, she evolved. She saw the truth, and in that seeing, she remembered her worth. Now your energy is expensive. It cannot be bought with sweet words or recycled apologies. It is reserved for those who honor it. And from this place, something shifts. You stop feeling the urge to prove your goodness. You stop trying to be reasonable with the unreasonable. You stop dimming your truth to soothe someone else's shadow. Because you know, your peace isn't up for debate. Your time isn't currency for chaos. Your love isn't available to those who weaponize it. You are no longer available for half-love. The sovereign queen would rather stand alone in truth than be held in deception. She would rather grieve the fantasy than live a lie. She would rather feel the sharp edge of solitude than the slow bleed of staying small. And so she chooses herself. Again and again. Not as an act of defiance, but devotion. Not to spite anyone, but to sanctify her own soul. Because when love feels like control, the most radical thing a woman can do is walk away. Not to prove a point, but to preserve her purpose. And from that quiet exit, a new era begins. One where she no longer confuses manipulation with meaning. One where love is no longer earned through exhaustion. One where her heart is not a battlefield, but a throne room. So now, as you stand on this threshold, ask yourself, what part of you still believes you must suffer to be loved? Whose voice lives rent-free in your mind, questioning your worth? And what truth have you been avoiding, simply because it would require you to rise? The time for pretending is over. The time for pleasing is over. The sovereign queen is awakening in you. She is not here to be rescued. She is here to reign. There is a silence that comes after liberation. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of peace, of no longer needing to defend, to explain, to bend. This is what remains after the storm. When the cords of control are cut, when the gaslight has flickered out, when the last echo of manipulation fades into memory, what's left is space. Space for breath. Space for truth. Space for the self to finally rise without fear of punishment. This is the reward for the woman who chose her truth over their comfort, her boundary over their approval, her peace over the familiar chaos. Because make no mistake, breaking free from control isn't just about them. It's about you. About the part of you that believed chaos was home. The part that saw red flags and called them roses. The part that confused tension for passion, silence for safety. But now you see. You see the way your nervous system used to brace for their moods. You see the way you once managed their emotions like it was your full-time job. You see the way your worth got tied to how much pain you could endure without flinching. That was never love. That was survival. And you survived, but now you choose to live. Jung spoke of the union between the conscious and unconscious, the sacred marriage within. It happens when the queen stops waiting for a king to crown her and realizes she has always worn the crown. It happens when the little girl inside no longer needs to perform for love, when the woman she became forgives herself for all the time she stayed small, when the soul, long buried beneath people-pleasing and performance, finally breathes. This is what true power feels like. Not domination, not defense, but rootedness. The unshakable knowing that you are no longer available for anything that costs your inner peace. From this place, love changes. You're no longer drawn to intensity that burns. You crave warmth that sustains. You're no longer seduced by mystery that hides manipulation. You desire transparency that nurtures trust. You're no longer available for lovers who need fixing, saving, or explaining. You're available for co-creators, partners in presence, sacred mirrors, not shadow triggers. And you don't fear being alone, because you've tasted the sweetness of your own company. You've walked through the valley of self-betrayal and emerged crowned in clarity. You've rebuilt your identity, not around who loves you, but around who you choose to be. That is power, the kind that cannot be manipulated, the kind that doesn't perform to be loved, the kind that walks away from anything that asks you to dim. You don't need to scream your worth. You are the worth. And now everything changes, because you no longer tolerate red flags dressed as romance. You don't flinch when someone withdraws love, because love isn't supposed to be a transaction. You don't chase what leaves. You don't explain what protects. You don't negotiate with energy that dishonors. You've become fluent in discernment. Your body is your compass. Your intuition is your sword. Your silence is your boundary. This is not hardness. This is refinement. You've integrated the lessons. You've named the patterns. You've stepped off the stage of manipulation and into the throne of self-mastery. The sovereign queen does not look back. She blesses the past, not because it deserved it, but because she does. She doesn't seek revenge. She seeks resonance. She doesn't fear being misunderstood. She stands in her knowing. She doesn't seek to prove her truth. She lives it. So now, standing in this clarity, ask yourself, what becomes possible when you stop doubting your perception and start honoring your inner knowing? What becomes sacred when your energy is no longer given in exchange for crumbs? And who do you become when you are no longer surviving love but thriving within it? Your life from this point forward will mirror the boundaries you honor, the self-respect you embody, and the truth you refuse to abandon. This is the gift of individuation. This is the quiet miracle of emotional intelligence. This is the freedom born from choosing peace over performance, authenticity over attachment, and sovereignty over sacrifice. So share it. Share the moment you finally said enough and reclaimed your power in the comments below. Your story will be the torchlight for someone still walking through their night. And always remember, the woman who sees the truth chooses her peace.